It's like 40 degrees outside. If you're up in the north laughing at that, I live in Texas. It's not supposed to be cold here. It's not fun. Alright, so on today's episode, we are going to, I don't know if you can consider this a part of the race car build episode or not. But anyway, on today's episode, we are going to drop the engine out of the car for the third time in a year. So this one's good. The last one was technically good. I was just a big dummy. So the first time I dropped the engine out of the car was because I had to do an engine, or I was looking to do some modifications to the engine. I had an engine harness issue and a couple other things. I was like, just be easier if the engine is, on engine stand or, just out of the car where I have easy access to it. Most of you probably know where that went to a full rebuild, and that's a long story. So then over the summer, I went to take my headers off because the exhaust wrap that I had on them was like disintegrating, okay? That resulted in me needing to drop the engine again because I found out that when you have the FP350S oil pan on there, you can't get them off. But by then I had destroyed all the, like the gaskets and a bunch of other stuff. So I ended up having to drop the engine again just to get the damn headers off. It was not fun. So we are on our third engine removal process for the year, and this one I will record and give you step-by-step instructions of. So if you're wondering why we're dropping it for a third time, it's to do our our post-season / winter refresh. So kind of with this engine, about every 40 hours you're supposed to go in there and replace some things that are high wear items and kind of check things out. We're at about 42.5 hours on this engine since the rebuild. And unfortunately, the one thing that, does kind of suck is there is a legitimate reason it needs to come out, and that's because we have oil dropping into the valves, or I should say we have oil pooling up on top of the intake valves and then going into the cylinders, of course, when, the engine runs. So it's burning some oil through that way. I don't know exactly why the valve seals were leaking. My guess is the original ones were used and not new ones were put in. It could also be that something's wrong with the valve seals. They got chewed up, they got scored up, and they no longer seal well. Who knows? But either way, we're gonna pull the engine out, replace the valve seals for number one, replace the timing chains and some things like that, and then kind of look around everything and see how everything's wearing. So, first step. Let's get it out of the car. All right, so if you've never done this before on this car, I would expect it to take probably 3, 4, maybe 5 hours, depending on, kind of your working speed, how prepared you are, all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping about an hour, hour and a half for me now that I, have a good idea of what I'm doing. That said, it'll probably take me 2.5 hours just because I have an optimistic goal. So the first thing you want to do is obviously going to be disconnect the battery. And I mean, anytime you touch anything with electricity, disconnect the battery. I've damn near electrocuted myself because I got to hurry and didn't disconnect the battery. So disconnect the battery, whether that be in there or in the car, wherever your battery is. Take the wheels off, take the front calipers, hang them, take the brake rotors off. That's just to give you working room inside the wheel well. Get all that crap out of the way so you can see. And then the next step is going to be to take the front bumper off. So with at least my setup, the easiest way to do this is going to be to take the bumper off, because the bumper and the belly pan and my splitter are all connected together and all reinforcing each other. So it's just easier to take the splitter, bumper, and belly pan all as one. On a dead stock car, you might rather disconnect just disconnect the splitter and the belly pan and leave the front bumper on. That's totally up to you. But for me, especially now that I have quick latches and stuff, the front bumper comes off really easy. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm gonna do the battery, then take the wheels, brake calipers, rotors off, hang the brake calipers, on the car, and then get that front bumper off. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on that. All right, now that we got the front off, we got the wheels off, we got the brake calipers off-ish. The next step for me, at least, I think is gonna be to get the exhaust and the drive shaft out. So there's not really a specific order you need to do these next parts in. It's just more that for me, I absolutely despise, hate, and want to kill myself when I'm trying to get the exhaust and the drive shaft out, specifically the exhaust. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that out of the way just so I don't have to deal with it later because it's so not fun. But depending on what exhaust you have, it can be sort of hard and really hard. So the exhaust I have under here is going to be that ARH long tube system. So it's a couple different pieces. You know, I got mid pipes that disconnect after the collector here on the long tubes. Then I have a resonator set, or then I have the X pipe, then the resonators, and then my OEM mufflers. So you can leave the OEM mufflers once you've cut them like I have. You can leave those on if you have a similar setup. If you have an OEM setup, you will have to break it right before the X pipe, or I should say disconnect it right before the X pipe and pull it apart. There's like no good way to do this, just a heads up. So and if you do have an OEM setup, you are going to have to remove the OEM mufflers because you will not be able to get the drive shaft out of the way. I mean, you might, but it'd just be such a pain. So I'd recommend just dropping, you know, pulling the whole system out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead under there and disconnect. If I remember right, the fastest or the best way to do it was to work back from the back to the front. So I'm going to go ahead and get the resonators out, then, you know, kind of work my way forward. And then I'll go ahead and get the drive shaft out. So I have an aftermarket drive shaft. I have the carbon fiber one, but the only difference is the OEM one has, you know, a bend in the middle, or a joint, I should say, in the middle, and it's a lot heavier. Other than that, it's pretty much the same deal. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those two removed, and that'll give us, you know, get us mostly ready to go under that part of the car. And then we can come here into the engine bay and start disconnecting, you know, the various wires, brake lines, and stuff like that. And I'll walk through that. All right, now that we got the drive shaft out of the way, the exhaust out of the way, it's going to be time here. I'm going to do what you need to do to remove or get this part of it ready to pop out too. So some things I've learned. Right here is a MagneRide sensor. If you have a GT350 or a GT with the MagneRide, you need to disconnect this little arm right here. Sorry, get you there. Oh, that doesn't help. You need to disconnect this little arm right here, the sensor, and the wire. The last time I did this, I didn't catch the wire and I stretched it pretty good and ended up having to do some repairs there. So make sure you disconnect this and the wire from it. You could just disconnect the whole thing, but then you have it dangling and it's weird. So whatever you prefer, just make sure you disconnect that. Next up will be making sure you disconnect the end link here. I did prefer to leave the strut in the car, so I disconnect the end link and then the knuckle. So what I do is I loosen these two bolts. I pull one of them out. I leave one of them in just to hold it in until we drop it down on the ground and I can support the knuckle. Next up will be, let's see if there's anything in here. Oh yeah, for this specifically, this one's unique to me, but disconnect to undo the remote oil filter mount. I think that's it on this side, but on the other side you will need to, if you have the engine oil cooler, make sure you disconnect it from up here. On this side with the transmission oil cooler, just disconnect these, or just remove these two bolts, and then this will lift up and this will stay here. Same thing over here, disconnect the end link, disconnect the MagneRide sensor, and then I'll go through a couple things up in the engine bay, but one of the other things to keep in mind is you do need to disconnect the, this guy here, you will need to disconnect the brake line here. So unfortunately, this brake line runs along the K-member down here, and at least for me, I don't see an easy way, especially with these transmission oil lines in the way, for you to get this out and drop the K-member, because a couple things run right over on top of it. I guess if you removed the oil lines and you removed the radiator hoses, you might be able to do it. I'm not 100% sure. To me, it's just not worth it. I'm just going to disconnect and then disconnect it up there and allow it to drop with the K-member. That's just the simplest for me. So those are the only things I think you got to do here is knuckle, end link, MagneRide. On this side, the brake line, and then on the front here, the two oil coolers, for me one, but for you if you have both, those two. And then the only other thing I think you have under here, other than when it comes time to start loosening bolts, is going to be to access the, let's see, it's right here. It's really, really hard to see. I'm sorry, I can't really show it to you better, but up in here is going to be the clutch line. There's a little tab that you pull out. It'll make sense when you can see it. There's just no way I can show you. But when you're ready, just pull that out, and then you can disconnect the hose. For me, I keep the line in the car and drop the clutch out of it. Oh yeah, other thing, steering here, I gotta go ahead and do that. So you take this bolt out, and that allows the steering shaft to go in, and then allows it to disconnect here. One more thing will be, when the time comes, I don't do this till last minute, but gonna remove these bolts so that this MGW shifter can come down and hang, and then the whole transmission can drop. So then we're gonna go ahead up into the engine bay and start to disconnect some things like wires and things like that, and lines and hoses and all that kind of good stuff. And once that's done, then we're ready to drop the car back down near the ground. We're gonna get the transmission jack, the dollies and stuff over there, and get everything supported. And what we do is we drop the K-member onto those, and then we disconnect all the bolts, and then lift the car back up off of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that stuff now. I'm gonna, just to recap, just because you really don't want to miss these things. It's such a pain when you do. Steering column bolt, magnetite sensor, both the wire and the part that connects to the rear arm there. The knuckle bolts, the oil coolers, and the end links. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. All right, one more thing before I forget is gonna be the ABS sensor that's on the back here. It's this little guy. It's held in by 7mm bolt. It goes into the back of the knuckle. So when you go ahead and disconnect the knuckle, it would stay with the strut. So you just gotta make sure that you disconnect that. All right, so now we're in the engine bay here. One thing I forgot to mention, front crash bar, impact bar. I know for me I need to do it because it interferes with my radiator ducting. And the radiator and the ducting and all that stuff goes down with the K-member in my case, because I'm not disconnecting the radiator hoses. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, so up in the engine bay, we got a couple things we need to do. One, we got to do that passenger side front brake line. That's going to be the second one, at least it was for me. And then, let's see, what else do we have? We have the fuel line here. We have the brake booster vacuum line there. And then depending on if you have the AC, air conditioning system, you will have all that goes into the car. So if you have a heater core or AC or anything like that, you will have a bunch of connections at the back of the firewall. I don't have that, so fortunately it's easier for me to do that. And then you have your main wiring harness here. So you have two wiring harnesses. You have the one that's on the engine itself, and then you have the one that runs to your let's see if I can remember correctly. I think it's your alternator, starter, and a couple other things. So you're gonna have two that you need to disconnect and flop over and get them up here on top of the engine, so as you drop it down, it doesn't rub as it goes down. I think that's it. We're really close to being able to drop this out. Fuel line, vacuum booster. If you have the AC / heater core hoses, those will be in the back. You do have we got one more thing here. Ground for the engine. This ground line right here that I'm pointing to runs to the back of the cylinder head, so you'll need to make sure to disconnect that. Once again, get the brake line out of the way, and then for me, disconnect these three connections, and then if you have a battery over there, disconnect both. Pull that over. So you got basically your battery wire, so back there, if you have a battery, you got your positive, you got your negative, disconnect both, then disconnect all the grounds you'll have one here, and then you'll have a bunch right here, or a bunch in the battery distribution box. Disconnect those, flap those up over on the engine, and then make sure you disconnect here from your PCM. All that needs to be disconnected as well. The only thing that doesn't need to be disconnected is in here you'll have your main chassis harness. You'll see that it runs from back there along your frame rail up through the front here and then back over. You do not need to disconnect that. You just do need to make sure that it's out of the way if you have any ducting. So I'm gonna go ahead and get all those connected and then checking in with you again. All right, so we're about ready to go here. I think the only thing we have left is I got to drop it down a little further just to get it on the supports here. So this is how I do it. I just have a couple of dollies, some wood blocks, and I drop the subframe down, or the K-member, sorry, down onto the dolly. And then I use a transmission jack for the transmission. I've actually already disconnected the transmission, and it's sitting on top of that jack over there. So the only thing we got left to do it, to pull it out, is you just have 4 nuts on each side and holding the subframe in on some studs. So you can see we got this one here, we got this one back here, and then we got 2, that one right here and one right here. So they're both right here where my 2 fingers are. So once you drop it down, you take those 4 nuts off, and then all you gotta do is start lifting the car up off this guy, and you're good to go. I think I got everything that we needed to do. I can't think of anything that I forgot, at least at the moment. All right, so we are ready to go. I got the knuckles here on the jack stands. I got all the nuts off. I did forget about 4 bolts, 2 on each side that go right here. So you got 2 here and 2 over there. Once you get those, I believe you'll be ready to go. I think I got everything. I've went around and checked things a few times. Like I said earlier, I probably forgot something, and I'm probably gonna have a really fun experience trying to raise this off the ground. But needless to say, I think we're ready to start. So I'm gonna go ahead and put you guys down, let you watch it come up off the car. So I'm gonna start to lift this up. This is a pretty slow process. Typically what I do is I lift it up, an inch at a time and kind of see where things are getting stretched. See if it's pulling on anything, all that good stuff. Alright, and just to give you guys some insight, when you get to this point, really the only thing you have to worry about is going to be making sure that this brake line comes out cleanly. I more just want to make sure it goes straight up. And then that steering shaft down in the back, or the steering column shaft thing way back there. You can see that it's very tight clearance with the long tubes. It's pretty much tight clearance regardless of what exhaust system you're using, so it's not really ever going to be easy, but it's especially tight with the long tubes. Yay! See, it's not that hard. It only took like 5.5 hours this time. It's not really that funny though. Well, now that the stressful, scariest part's done, we're in pretty good shape. So I'm gonna end the video here because this is, I think, where most people will, kind of go their own direction, whether they, dismantle the engine completely or, just do whatever else you might do here. But in the next video, I guess I'll start taking things apart and kind of digging into it a bit. I don't plan to record all of it just because a lot of this stuff's pretty straightforward, or stuff that other people might not really care about. I think what most are going to care about is me digging into this motor and folks getting to see that. So, but what's up next for me is obviously to get undress the engine, if you will, disconnect the oil lines, the cooler, all that kind of stuff, and then get ready here with the transmission and get ready to disconnect that. So we're going to go ahead and cut this video off and get started on the next one in the morning, tomorrow afternoon sometime. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment. If you have any advice, recommendations, anything like that, always reach out. I'm always happy to learn a new way to do things and a more efficient way, safer way to do stuff, and not recommend people do something that's inefficient. So thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll catch you later.